It's been a long time coming, the moment we have all been waiting for. I so desperately want to tell you what happens as a bit of a teaser, but to be honest, this finale is so chaotic and twisted that I couldn't do it any justice in the intro. If you've come this far in the series, you likely need a little coaxing. This is the fourth part of a 4-part series. The playlist is linked in the comments and description. Please watch those first. You'll thank me when you meet me back here. Roll post. They wanted me to figure out why they were angry and do so with no tangible information at all. They just wanted me to guess their feelings blindly and make sacrifices on their behalf. It was completely, genuinely insane. And I told them so. I told them and everyone else that their demands were ridiculous and their feelings didn't really matter to me. My character wasn't doing anything outside the scope of the rules, and given how enormously powerful Sierra was, she wasn't allowed to complain. If Sierra was so afraid of that sword, then clearly it was doing its job of keeping her in check. As for the disrespect, I had every right to challenge her during RPG Hell, given how often she bent and broke rules in order to guarantee favorable outcomes. If either of them were upset, then they had no one to blame because they were making themselves upset. I wasn't contacting them in any way out of character or in character, and I avoided them as much as possible. I had adhered to every rule we had regarding player interactions to the letter. As for, quote, figuring out their feelings, why? Neither one of them were anything to me other than casual acquaintances. I wasn't in a relationship with either of them, nor were they relatives or close friends. I knew next to nothing about them on a personal level, so there was absolutely no way in hell I would ever be able to figure out anything about their feelings, since none of us knew anything about each other. Was I being a bit of a that guy? Yes, and for good reason. Look, man, you've stuck with this group for this long. You get to take some liberties. Is it right? No, not at all. But it's hard to blame you for making one negative infraction when everybody else is this bad. Screw it, burn it all down, roll post. After all the crap I had been put through by and because of them, I had no desire to even try. Delta's I poke, you wiggle attitude was insensitive at best, and I had no reason to trust Sierra at all. Now they were making unreasonable demands and insisting on sacrifices that were basically stripping me of both agency and ability. I had been leaving them both alone for a long time, but they were not reciprocating. I was the one who needed to be left alone and apologized to, not the other way around. I then started posting parts of our own logs of the two, of them having out-of-character conversations together, making all kinds of nasty remarks and comments about me behind my back in a separate part of the site where they clearly never expected anyone to actually read the backlogs. Unfortunately for them, I had read those logs and I hadn't been the only one. If I'm making complaints, at least there's an actual reason for them. The same cannot be said about you two. Delta and Sierra had finally begun their opening barrage, but I'd returned fire with a sustained counter barrage of my own that they never anticipated. The war was in full swing at that point, and it was only going to get worse. The end has come. Authors forward. I've dealt with a great many manipulative and deceitful people in my life. I also know from painful experience that emotions can be weaponized and used to trick and mislead others. The best way to protect yourself from a con artist is to know all the tricks. I fully believe that Delta and Sierra had been pretending to be upset and angry in order to manipulate everyone else into supporting them. Years later, I found out that I had been 100% correct. Unfortunately, everyone at the time had fallen for their ruse. After my overt display of insensitivity, what happened next was essentially a trial. In and out of character, my continued existence within the group was on the line, and it soon became clear to me that most of the support I previously had during RPG Hell had diminished. It wasn't until later that I got confirmation. It had been planned in advance. Some of the other players admitted later on that they had been contacted offline and intimidated by one or both girls. They were genuinely afraid of Delta and Sierra at that point. Another guy contacted me and told me that he had been invited to a group chat hosted by both girls. Mike, Whiskey, and Foxtrot had been there, listening to Delta and Sierra talking about me and getting progressively angrier. He then told me he noped out of there within minutes because both girls seemed genuinely obsessed with me and not in a fun way. The last sentence was more important than some might think. We often see comments saying that these stories are unrealistic because people aren't leaving as soon as something seems fishy. The truth is, most do. These stories generally come from those who stayed the course through the warning signs, for whatever reason. Ironically, the assumption that nobody has ever stuck with a bad experience for longer than they should have is itself unrealistic, as it denies a pretty huge part of human experience. Sorry, I had to pick my daily fight with the YouTube commenters in the comment section. Roll post. Foxtrot's general attitude towards me had gotten much more openly hostile. It only got worse over time the more Delta fixated on me. It didn't take a genius to understand why, since his crush on Delta was well known to all of us. Bravo had become much the same way. He was siding with and supporting Sierra more and more. At that point, the question of who was actually in charge had been raised yet again. I still had a few people on my side by then, but the matter was not a fair trial at that point. There was no jury of my peers, because it seemed like the admins were getting angry at me for not just giving Sierra and Delta whatever they wanted, just to shut them up and let everyone else get back to the game. Over the next couple of days, it was non-stop arguing and fighting. All gaming had been suspended. Yankee had been nominated as a neutral arbiter, and he ultimately determined that neither side was right or wrong. I was being antagonistic in his opinion, but I was being provoked and antagonized as well. I was what he had called a true conundrum. I objected, because Delta had called on me to make sacrifices. I felt like I was being singled out and bullied. I wasn't being allowed to play my character the way I wanted to. I wasn't being allowed to explore any new avenues of growth and advancement that I wanted to. Meanwhile, Sierra was being allowed to do whatever she wanted, and Delta was being permitted to be an obnoxious and overbearing party mom that no one ever wanted or needed. I was sick of the free passes and sacrifices that were always being made for Sierra. I was sick of Delta's nasty attitude. I was sick of apologizing for things that had long since been resolved. I was sick of playing Guess the Grievance on account of two people who really weren't worth the effort being demanded. I am not the problem here. They are. They are playing all of you for fools. Get rid of them before they both destroy our group. Yes, I went there. I said it. I went full throttle that guy. I'm not asking AITA because I know I had, and I make zero apologies for it, because it had been a long time coming and long overdue. Unfortunately, it was too late at that point. Delta and Sierra had spent weeks, maybe months, poisoning everyone's opinions of me. They weren't entirely successful, since I've formed genuine friendships with some of the other players that persist to this day. However, they slandered and smeared me in the eyes of enough of the other players that most of them sided with Sierra and Delta instead of me. Others had been intimidated into remaining neutral, Emotions had been running too high for far too long, and cooler heads were not allowed to prevail. Honestly, I memed before, but to be Crab for a second, how possible is it exactly to be the good guy when everyone else around you is so completely wrong? There are many tales about good men in the world's gone bad, and unfortunately, things don't go well for the good guy in a lot of these scenarios. Usually either getting removed, or he is consumed by the wickedness of the universe and falls that way, creating either the sacrificial hero or the anti-hero archetypes. It's pretty hard to tell exactly where he is right now, but we'll find out exactly where OP exists on this spectrum at the end of this story. Anyways, me being a writing nerd aside, roll post. The coming decision was made because I refused to work with anyone to come up with an acceptable resolution to the massive problem. It was decided that I was the one who needed to go, not Delta or Sierra. I was told to quietly depart and never return. One of the orders Echo told me, "Get out of our lives and get on with yours." The exile had begun, and Delta wasted no time in celebrating openly. She and Sierra had been looking forward to me leaving for a while, and all of the work they'd put in had finally paid off. I was gone. Everyone else had just hoped that over the next week or two, maybe tempers would cool, rational minds would eventually prevail, decisions would be reconsidered, and the game would ultimately resume. They were terribly mistaken on all counts. None of those things actually happened. I already had a contingency plan and transferred my character in entirety over to a new group and was welcomed happily. The new group was made up mostly of the people who quit our campaign. There was a lot of resentment between the new group and Bravo, and that suited me just fine. My joining their group was taken as an insult to both Sierra and Bravo. Am I the a-hole? Hell yes, and no regrets. Sierra officially laid down new rules in the campaign from that point forward. She was the one in charge, and there were 2 sets of rules, one for her and one for everybody else. The main character had finally arrived. Everyone who obeyed her rules would be fine. Anyone who resisted would be dealt with in the same way that I had. Yes, she literally used what had been done to me as a threat to keep the others in line. Delta soon found new people to harass. One friend of mine got bullied so badly it caused her actual problems in real life due to the stress and anxiety that she was being continually subjected to. Delta did it because my friend's character was, quote, annoying. Soon afterwards, my friend got banned from the site because she finally snapped and berated Delta online. No, Delta was not banned despite her openly admitting to what she had been doing. She hated my friend, said she was annoying, and that she should have been banned from the site sooner. Then, Delta went in after somebody else, because that person was, quote, infuriating. Then Delta went after someone else, because that person hadn't supported me enough during the war against me. Delta then shattered Foxtrot by telling him, in character and out, that he was never going to be anything more than a friend to her. You see, he had done everything that she asked of him and supported her every step of the way. But in the end, he had been friend-zoned with extreme prejudice. Sierra broke up with Bravo, saying that they'd become different people with different interests. She still had supreme authority though. However, her epic scale campaigns did not get very far. Her art commission business, it also failed hard. In most of these tales, the side of the majority is correct a solid majority of the time, in my estimation of course. This is one of the rare instances where there was a good group that existed for over 6 years, and one player was trying to hold it together the way it was, while another faction manipulated and changed it in her image. The problem with this is the same as the problem with appeasement. The aggressor is never satisfied until everyone falls in line with their line of thought. What we just saw was thoughtless and destructive. What we're about to see is even more so. Roll post. Delta kept on attacking one person after another, on and on, over and over. Everyone began to openly hate her because of this, but no one could point to anything about her because Sierra made a point of actively protecting her. Knowing that, Delta openly flaunted her special position, knowing that she would pretty much get whatever she wanted to whoever she wanted, and Sierra would protect it. This was the final straw for a lot of people, and they started quitting as well. What was the point of even trying at this point? Our entire group, which had persisted for almost 7 years at that point, had been rendered foobar, all because of 2 players, and if they had been banned instead of me, the entire nightmare could have been averted. But too many of them have been convinced it was somehow all my fault and couldn't stand the idea of admitting that they were wrong. So, I remained exiled and continued to have infinitely more fun with my new gaming group, while they continued to suffer antagonism and abuse from Delta and Sierra. Later on, I found out that my character's departure was even included in the game. It had been done as a means of taking one last parting stab at me out of character. Within the game, fires burned and a few characters openly celebrated in the streets as my character's home and belongings were plundered and razed. Certain items and places were destroyed to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Other things were destroyed out of spite. Delta danced and sang as all traces of my character were cast down and broken into shards. His name erased and replaced with a title meant to convey contempt and hatred. The Exile. Some who remained despised him because they had been told to do so. Others hated him because he had opposed them. The rest feared him. They feared him because he had been right the entire time. No one had listened to him, and now it was too late. They feared him because he was the manifestation of their own cowardice. They had broken every oath and betrayed every trust. Justice had failed. Honor had been tainted. They feared him because of his last enraged words, screamed at them as he faded from sight. "I'm coming for all of you." But what ultimately happened to Delta and Sierra? Once I left, I occasionally got updates from a few of the others I stayed in touch with. One of those people was Foxtrot, who decided to try and antagonize me just to be an ass. When I asked him why he was even bothering, his response was, "You're an amusing distraction if nothing else." I didn't bother making any kind of scathing reply, I just blocked him. Everybody else who contacted me were disgruntled and upset. Their mood was that I had been right the whole time. Sierra was running the site like she owned it, becoming the alpha main character, and Delta had gone on an antagonistic rampage. As previously mentioned, she had started going down a list of people that she had major grudges against. Eventually, everyone turned on her side because they had gotten sick of her terrible attitude. But since Sierra was always protecting her, everyone soon became even more pissed off at her instead. She knew what Delta was doing and didn't care. Delta knew that she was being shielded and kept on escalating. It turned into a cycle of abuse where Sierra was at the center of it. Finally, one day Sierra just up and quit. She gave no indication that she had planned to do so, and she never gave any explanations. She just disappeared in the middle of an argument and never returned. Yes, the argument had been about Delta. Within a day or so, it was confirmed that Sierra had quit for good. Delta got the fudge out of Dodge and never came back either. Her skirt of protection had vanished, and there were a lot of people ready to tear her apart in character and out. They were that sick of her. Thus, the reign of terror by Delta and Sierra came to an anticlimactic end. There wasn't any great battle or stirring debate that ended up in an epic declaration of "Be gone, thought." Whatever it was that Sierra wanted or tried to create just didn't happen, and it obviously was never going to happen. Everyone had turned on her, and whatever respect she had built for herself had been lost. So she went into her own exile. The end.